First of all, you need to understand with percentages that they're nothing to be scared of. They are just another way of writing numbers down, so they're just a type of number. They are linked quite closely to fractions, so it's important that you understand how fractions work, at least at the very basic level, before you embark on looking at percentages. The word percent is derived from the Latin, meaning by the hundred. So percentum means by the hundred. 25%, for example, means 25 parts out of 100. 50% means 50 parts out of 100. So essentially, a percentage is just a fraction where the denominator, that is the number on the bottom, is equal to 100. So the reason we use percentages is to try and make sure we have a common and comparable way of comparing fractions or numbers with each other. This is quite important. Let's give an example of how this works. Here's an example of two schools. In one of the schools, 3 out of 4 of the students are boys. In the other, the number is 7 out of 10. How do we know which one has the most boys? 7 out of 10 is not that easy to compare with 3 out of 4 unless you're really confident with your numbers. So which school has the highest fraction of boys? This is easy when we know that 3/4 is the same as 75% and that 7 out of 10 is the same as 70%. We can very easily see now that the school with 3 out of 4 of the students being boys, i.e. 75% of them, has the highest fraction of boys. So even with this very simple example, you can see how useful the idea of fractions can be. We very quickly answered the question once we turned the information into percentages. Because percentages are so easy to compare in this way, they're used very frequently in lots of everyday situations. So for example, you will have seen it in the recent European football championships, where pass completion was quite a high interest to some people. We see it in financial data, where we look at the movement in shares on the stock exchange. And in schools we see it as well, where the attainment and achievement of students is published in terms of percentages passing exams and percentages getting 5 or more A star to C in their exams. These are 3 very different ways of using percentages. So you can see how useful they are because of the multitude of uses that it's put to. Because they're used so frequently in everyday situations, it is really important that you understand the basics of percentages. Otherwise you run the risk of being, well, in some circumstances being misled, and in a lot of circumstances ending up costing you a lot of money if you don't understand clearly how they work. Let's look at a less controversial example to show you how percentages are calculated. We're going to use the football information. So we have a table that shows us the pass completions for each of the teams in a recent football tournament. And if we look at this, we've got 2 columns there. One is pass attempts and the other one is pass completions, PA and PC. So we can see that 1,135 passes were completed out of a total of 1,525. So the fraction of completed passes was, well, 1,135 divided by 1,525. To turn this into a percentage, we do the division and we times by 100. So we do 1,135 divided by 1,525, and then we times that by 100. The division sum there is equal to 0.744. We times that by 100 and we get 74.4% of passes were completed. And if you look at that table, you'll see that that's the lowest percentage of that group of games, quite possibly because England were involved and brought down the average a little bit. Let's look at another example. We often want to use percentages, as we did at the start there, to compare information in a consistent way. An example you'll frequently see of this, particularly in schools, is comparing test scores with each other. So let's say that you've done two tests. Test 1 is marked out of 60 and you got 36. Test 2 is marked out of 80 and you scored 45. On which test did you do better? It's not easily obvious there, is it? We might think, well, I got 45 on the second test, so it must be better. Well, let's work out the percentage scores that you got in each test. 36 out of 60, well, that is 36 divided by 60 times 100 to give you the percentage. That equals 60%. Second test was 45 out of 80, which, to work out a percentage there, very straightforward, 45 divided by 80 times 100. Well, 45 divided by 80 is 0.5625, times it by 100 gives a percentage of 56.25%. Because we now have both test scores as a percentage, we can compare the two marks. In the first test we got 60% and in the second test we got 56.25%. So in the first test we got the higher percentage score, which means that we got a better test result in that first test. We can see from this example that a straightforward comparison of two scores doesn't always give you the right answer. 45 was more than 36, but the percentage scores were the other way around. Percentages become slightly less scary if we always remember that they are just a number. They're just a way of comparing different values with each other in a consistent way. As long as you know your fractions at this basic level and you can do the divisions and multiplications required, percentages are fairly simple and straightforward.